Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about the general elections and the Muslims' participation within the general elections. I'm going to do this in two main sections. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the Muslim community in the UK, and then I'm going to talk about how we can enact change and what we can do on a local level to make a difference. And then we can have some questions afterwards. So firstly, an overview of Muslims in the UK. Now, just to summarize this, let me try something. I'm going to quickly show you something. Here you go. This is a report that was put together by the Muslim Council of Britain. It's called British Muslims in Numbers, and it's a study based on the 2011 census, just explaining a bit about the British Muslim community. So within 2 minutes, it should give you a quite good overview. So I'm going to try and give that here.
Muslims are overwhelmingly young. The Muslim and BME population should be recognized as a strategic resource, as our overall population is aging. The level of education amongst Muslims has increased in the last 10 years, with almost half of all full-time students being female.
Okay, that's a good start. Let's try again. Let's try somewhere from here. Okay, well, it looks like it's not going to work. I don't know why. But anyway, that gave a kind of short introduction to the Muslim community in the UK. There we go. There we go. But in summary, what we can see from the British Muslim population is about 3 million Muslims in the UK, 5% of the population. And from another report that the Muslim Council of Britain have done, we have a huge economic clout as well. So it's about 31 billion pounds is our impact on the GDP of this country, which is not a small amount. With hundreds of people, or thousands of people in managerial professions and hiring other people. So there's a big economic area too. But what we notice is that the Muslim community is very diverse. Okay, it's not just one group. There's Asians, Somalis, Afghanis, Iraqis, of a whole range of different ethnicities. But what we do notice is that 90% of the British Muslim population considers themselves to be of some sort of minority ethnic community, which shows that there's likely to be a lot of overlap between the desires of the Muslim community and the BME population as well. And so let me just talk about then the political positioning of the Muslim community. So we've seen that you've got a very diverse community with a lot of economic clout, who's very, very different, very ethnically diverse. But now when it comes to the politics of things, what's quite interesting is that as a whole, Muslims really seem to be supporting Labour. Not just previously, also right now. I mean, historically, it's been more, but that's sort of died down in recent years. But almost 50% of the Muslim population end up voting Labour. In the 2015 general elections, for the first time, the Green Party seems to be gaining somewhere, right? It used to be about 2%, according to the Ashcroft poll in 2012. So now it's more like 20%. And these are mainly people who used to vote Lib Dems, seem to be moving towards the Greens. The Conservatives are down at like 10, 11%, or 12%. Now Lib Dems are down to 9% and others are at 11%. What you notice, which is very interesting, is that there are a lot of Muslims for whom many of their values, social values in particular, and as well as economic values, tie up with the Conservative Party. But they still don't seem to be voting Conservative. And that's very interesting to note. And then there is a reason for that, and we can come to that later. Okay, so you can see in the overall politics of things, Muslims are very much aligned to Labour as a whole. But what really matters is if you start looking at all of the seats across the country, and I'm not sure you can see much of this here. If you look at every seat in the country and you try and compare how many Muslims there are in each of these seats and how big the majority is, in other words, what swing is required to move from one party to another for the seat to change hands, you'll realize there are about 40 seats in the parliament where Muslims can have a major influence. And remember, we're in a situation right now where every seat matters, where it's very likely that we're going to have a hung parliament, and you're going to have a situation where no one party will have enough to rule by itself. And with that kind of situation, any power to be able to influence seats in the election, 40 seats, equivalent to about 8% of the total, is significant. And in many of these cases, it is very, very straightforward for the Muslim community. Were they to vote in a block vote, which is unlikely, but were they to vote strategically and understand the power of the vote, there's a very interesting opportunity, and which is why some of the parties are trying to court what they call the Muslim vote, if there is such a thing. So if you see that there is a real chance to make a difference, the question is, what do you do about it on a local level? It's not just about realizing that the Muslim community wants something, or you in a local area want something. How do you do anything about it? So in general, I've put together a 5-step process, but it's this process is not necessarily in this order. It can be done in different ways, of course, very adaptable in different situations. But there are 5 main things that need to happen. The first thing, which is very important, is the uniting of the community. As we showed, in every one of these areas, if the Muslims don't vote strategically or cleverly, there's a problem. And realistically, you don't want everyone to just vote based on what one person says at the top, but you need to have a united force, at least understanding the value of voting together. So that's the first thing, unite the community. The second thing is gather data and analysis. So what do the Muslim community in your area or nationally want? What are the key concerns of the Muslim community? So that's the second thing to worry about. The third thing is obviously engage the candidates. Make sure the candidates know who you are and that you can make a big difference. Fourthly, educate your community. Every community needs to be as well informed as possible so that any choice that is made on an informed basis. And finally, participate in the political process and actually make a difference. And we'll go through each one of these in turn. And this is something that actually we're doing quite a lot of here in Harrow. And we'll talk about that here. So the first thing we've got is uniting the community. So here in Harrow, we've created something called the Muslim Forum of Middlesex. It's been around for about 10 years, more than 10 years now, since 1997 actually. And we sort of revived it recently. And we've got Harrow Central Mosque, the Pakistan Society of Harrow, the Stanmore Mosque, Sri Lankan Cultural Community Centre, Mahfil here, Harrow Kuwaiti Community Association, activists from HASVO, which is Harrow Association of Somali Volunteers, volunteering organizations from the Somali community, as well as Muslim councillors. All working together, all united, all with the same goal of ensuring that the Muslim community are well informed and make the decision that is best for them on an informed basis. Not in a partisan way, but in a way that understands the concerns of the community. So we've been able to have at least some level of success in uniting the Muslim community, at least, in this one area, in the idea of political participation and engagement. The second one is the hardest one, and this is understanding the concerns of the Muslim community. So firstly, we need to do this at a national level, because many of the national issues affect us locally, and then understanding it at a local level. And both of them are done differently. So at a national level, what you want is a national body, like the Muslim Council of Britain, to come together and to do this work for us, and to say, what are the key concerns that really matter? So the MCB, for example, has put together a report called Fairness, Not Favours. The idea being Muslims want fairness and don't want to be treated in any favourable way, just in a fair way. And as part of that, there are several issues that they brought up in this report. The first of which is probably the most important, is that when legislation affects any community, ignoring that community while still going ahead with that legislation does not seem to be the most sensible way to run a government. And that seems to have been the case in the last 5 years, that the Muslim community as a whole has not been engaged with by the government. Even Conservative Party members and Conservative ministers have acknowledged this fact. And this is a very dangerous situation where communities who are impacted by legislation are ignored in the legislation-making process and are not proactively engaged, rather only reactively sometimes listened to, and even then not really. So that's a real major shift in the last 5 years, that Muslims are not being talked to. And why is that important? Because on every issue that matters, and we'll come through to some of them in a second, on every issue that matters, if the Muslim community are not talking to the government, if the government are not talking to the Muslim community, how can any of these issues be dealt with in a reasonable and informed way? So that's the core, very important part of the requests or the things that really matter at a national level. The second thing is, well, okay, the government itself needs to be as representative of the people who are electing them. The electorate is a very diverse community. It is not all British, it's not all white, male British people. It's a very ethnically diverse, men and women, 50% each, and a range of different ethnicities. But what we have is the Muslims are not very well represented in Parliament. When you have only 8 MPs, when statistically there should be closer to 30 MPs, you're in a situation where representation is not there. And so therefore, on the one hand, the Muslim community is not part of the government. On the other hand, Muslim community is not well represented and not listened to very much. So both of those things together form a very important problem that we're facing right now. So what are the key issues that impact the Muslim community on a national level? So the first of which is discrimination against Muslims, Islamophobia, in every one of its forms. And there's so many different forms in which Islamophobia has been rampant and has been growing. According to the British Social Attitude Survey, this is a key thing. Islamophobia has been growing. And we've seen that 37% of the British population would support policies that would reduce the number of Muslims in the UK. 37% of the British population would support such policies. And that is the situation we're in right now. There was a poll done by Sky just recently, just today, released, which again showed that the suspicion against Muslims is rising to levels not seen before. This is very dangerous. You don't want to have a rift in the community where people are suspicious of Muslims. And where is this suspicion coming from? The suspicion is coming from the fact that the media are continuously talking about Muslims in a negative way. And how, okay, am I just making this up or is this real? Well, 9 in 10 articles, according to a study that was released recently, well, not that recently, but 9 in 10 articles in newspapers, when it comes to Muslims, are negative. 9 in 10, 90%. When you look at actual stories that come out, the sort of inaccurate stories, you have examples of these all the time. For example, the idea that Muslims are taking over Christmas and you can't have Christmas celebration. I mean, seriously, this never happened. It was a made-up story. Muslims trying to kill the Pope. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's nice. Not happening, not real. But these are sensationalist stories that have filled the tabloid press. But the reality is, unfortunately, this is not really only the tabloid press who are talking in this way. Just a few weeks ago, the Times had an article, front page story, talking about Muslim sex grooming. How any of this has anything to do with Islam is beyond anyone. It's nothing to do with Muslims. The fact is that you have pedophilia amongst many parts of the media, institutionalized, for example, when we've seen with many of these situations. Of course.
Adding to that, it's not just the non-Muslims, it's some despicable Muslims that are
Exactly, you have Muslims who add to this because it sometimes furthers their own political interests to be seen in the light of in that light, in terms of standing up to the Muslim community. It's a very easy position to have and to say that it's something to do with Islam, because attacking Islam right now is something that is very easy to do and it wins you votes, and that's something that's very dangerous right now. We've had a situation where a front page of another broadsheet newspaper said Islamic law adopted by British legal chiefs. Nothing to do with anything. They're just entirely unfactual, completely made up. The idea of Sharia courts that come up again and again and again. Realistically, there is no difference between Sharia courts and the Jewish Beth Din courts, which do the exact same thing. But one is ignored when it comes to the media, and one is seen as the biggest, worst thing ever to hit the UK and attacking us. We have politicians. Boris Johnson said in 2005, granted it was a while ago, he said Islam is the problem. I mean, you can't have a situation, he said the taboo has to be broken about talking about saying that the problem is Islam, because Islam is the problem in The Spectator in 2005. This is a problem. That someone who may end up being the Prime Minister of the UK, who is already hugely powerful as a London mayor, has these kinds of views. Now, of course, recently, only a month ago, Nigel Farage, of course, on the fringe of the political elite, one might say, said that many Muslims form a fifth column and want to kill us. And they're a migrant group who, for the first migrant group, who want to actually change us and change who we are and what we are. Now, this kind of attack on the Muslim community in such a broad way is completely unacceptable. When he made similar comments about race, every party leader stood up and said, this is unacceptable, Nigel Farage is talking nonsense, in nicer form. They all said that. When it came to Muslims, they didn't. Why? Because Islamophobia is socially acceptable now. In polite dinner table conversation, it's okay to talk about Muslims in a negative way. The conservative peer, Miqdaad Versi, formerly part of the cabinet, said Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test. In other words, you can just talk about it without anyone caring. What has happened is that Islamophobia is the last form of bigotry and racism that is considered to be acceptable now. And it's a very dangerous situation to be in. And that's why it's number one on what I'm talking about right now. Because it's pervaded the whole of society. We have situations where charities have problems. We have situations where counterterrorism there are issues with. When halal is talked about, there is a problem. Why? Only because Muslims are involved. The UKIP agricultural spokesperson, when they were talking about halal, was saying we can't have stunned. You have to stun the food before you kill it, the animals before you kill it. He was very clear. He said you have to. And someone raised up to him and said, actually, this affects the Jewish community as well because it affects kosher. And he says, no, it's not about you guys. It's about the other guys. Just imagine. And this type of attitude is just there in society and no one's talking about it. So Islamophobia is a major concern. Let me add even more to this because I just find Islamophobia so important that I want to talk more about it. Childline have said that there was a 70% increase in the number of children who are calling up because of bullying, and this is mainly because of Islamophobia. People saying, oh, you're a terrorist. This is from children's age. We have Ammar told me that one of the students that he knows went to his father and asked him, well, are you a terrorist? Because his father had a long beard. Just imagine, this is the type of thing that's happening in schools. A year 5, someone else came and told me that a governor had a problem in their school because the year 5s in their school, all were being Islamophobic. As in, Islamophobia was rampant within their year 5 children. We have another person who came and told me that in their school, people were taking their children out of RE because Islam was being taught. These are the real things that are happening in our society. At university level, Muslims are worried about engaging in political participation. Why? Because that might result in them being deemed an extremist. when it goes to the workplace, Muslim males are 70% less likely to get a job than their British male white counterparts, according to a discrimination report done by Bristol University at the end of last year. And now when it comes to actual attacks against Muslims, on average, every day a Muslim is attacked. On every 2 weeks, a mosque or a cemetery is attacked in some way, including, for example, one which was burnt down in Muswell Hill. This is the situation we're facing right now. And this ignores the hate mail that keeps on coming. This ignores the unreported attacks that happen. We have someone within this community itself who was threatened on the Jubilee line on the way home because she was wearing a headscarf. It is something that really affects all of us. When I was running with, again, another member of the community here, he got thrown, an egg got thrown at him. This was post 9/11. This is something that is very dangerous. And I can't emphasize how important it is that we recognize it as a real concern and we raise it. Because without understanding this concern, our place in British society will not be like everybody else, but will be apart from everyone else. So that's why, again, it's a very key, important part of what we're discussing. Then there's all the main issues that affect everybody. When it comes to education, RE, faith schools, Sharia compliance, student finance, you've got economy. Now, when it comes to the economy, the Muslim community as a whole faces greater unemployment than the broader, wider community, and there's a greater amount of inequality. So what I mean by this is that 50% of the Muslim community reside in the 10% most disadvantaged areas. So let me repeat that. 50% of the Muslim community reside in the 10% most socially deprived and disadvantaged areas. So anything that affects those 10% disadvantaged areas really affects a significant proportion of the Muslim community. So inequality, social justice, housing, issues that affect the poor really, really impact the Muslim community more than any other community. Okay, so that's really important. And similarly with health, community involvement is key, especially when it comes to things like diabetes and other things which affect the Muslim community a bit more, partially because of the Asian background of a significant proportion of it. But also when it comes to ill health, what we notice is there's especially amongst older women, Muslim older women have a significantly worse health perception of themselves. Significantly worse. And it's something that really has not been dealt with. And one of the reasons it's not being dealt with is because people aren't talking. Okay? And then there's the obvious questions about burial and coroner services, which we know about. Justice and policing. We've had a talk here a few weeks ago talking about which mentioned, amongst other things, the counterterrorism and security bill, something that really impacts the entirety of the community here. But it's not just about the counterterrorism bill, which we can spend a while talking about if anyone's interested later. But it's also about the fact that when it comes to the police force itself, when it comes to security services, when Muslims are not represented in the security forces, which are trying to keep us all safe in our mutual goal of keeping everyone safe, then we're going to have a problem. And finally, when it comes to justice, legal aid. So as I said, the Muslim community are disproportionately amongst the poorer part of the society, and therefore legal aid and the restrictions to legal aid over the last 5 years really impacts the Muslim community. And finally, international affairs. So when it comes to international aid, we have a target of 0.7% of our GDP going to supporting aid. The Muslim Council of Britain is pushing for that to even be pushed up to 1%. The European Convention of Human Rights, something that we want to obviously adhere to and keep to and not throw under the bus because it's something that we don't like. And finally, an importance of an ethical foreign policy. Now, all of these are detailed in far more detail in the Fairness Not Favours report, which is available online. Okay. Now, that's on a national level. But the reality is that when it comes to the Muslim community, and when we're trying to make a difference in our local community, we shouldn't only think about national issues. We should very much think about what affects the local Muslim community. So, first thing we need to do, and we're going to talk about Harrow a little bit here, is understand what is happening here in Harrow. Okay, are we a force to be reckoned with in Harrow? Well, the majority in both Harrow East and Harrow West is about 3,500 in Harrow East and Harrow West. In each of those areas, Muslims of voting age are about 9,000 or 10,000. So 3 times what the majority is in these areas. So a significant force in the area. So what do Muslims care about? We'll talk about this in a second. So we've talked about the national issues, but there are also local issues. And from the Muslim Forum of Middlesex and from our group, we wanted to find out what were the issues that mattered. So we had a survey done, and we'll talk about that in a second, and as well as detailed focus groups. And then we've talked about already what do Muslims care about nationally. So the initial survey looked something like this. Not that it's very easy to follow, but foreign policy or some sort of policy always came up at the top. Education, tax, and Muslims seems to come up quite a lot. Okay, that's not that important. Key concerns. This is a nicer way of showing it. Education and health were number 1 and 2. Then social justice, then economy, then Islamophobia, then representations of Muslims in public life, and ethical and consistent foreign policy near the bottom, with immigration right at the bottom. That's an interesting result of the local community, and it seems to be corroborated by other polls done, for example, by the Muslim News, which had not dissimilar results at all. Okay, so however, I would like to state that whilst ethical and consistent foreign policy seems to be nearer at the bottom, I think it's also something that people are very passionate about. They may not say it's their primary concern, but it's their concern that they seem to be very passionate about as well, as we've seen in local hustings. Now, this was the result of a survey and focus groups done by the Muslim Forum of Middlesex to understand what the concerns are. So this is really important. Whenever you're trying to do something in a local area, you need to create that fact base so you understand what the concerns are at a national level, at a local level, and whether you can really make a difference. Now, once you've done that, you need to start engaging the candidates directly. So how do you do that? How do you engage with the candidates? Now, we've done that quite well here. So we showed a united front, as in the leaders of all these 6 communities, or within the executive committee of all those 6 communities, have come together and have spoken to each of the candidates, from both the Labour side, from the Conservative side, and from the Liberal Democrat side, and talking to them on a one-on-one basis, saying, really, you need to listen to us. This opens up the doors, because now those MPs who are potentially, or the parliamentary candidates, who are potentially our representatives in the parliament, who make the decisions that impact us and the wider community, know who we are, and know that we are a force to be reckoned with, and know that we come up with sensible policies that really can help them. And so we started that 6 to 8 months ago. Okay, and again, you need to start in advance. You don't do this last minute. And so that's what you do. You introduce yourself, you start these small meetings. But it's not only about these meetings being small meetings that a couple of people talked about. You want to make the wider population, as much as possible, participate in this process. And that's why you have public hustings. And we've had 2 so far for Harrow East. And we have another one planned next week on Sunday for Harrow West. Details will be shared soon. But this is about ensuring that the candidates are transparent. They're accountable. And you're able to ask them the questions that you really care about. And that's the whole point about these public hustings. Make sure that they're videotaped and making sure that anybody can access them later on. Because not everyone can make everything at each time. And the final point, which is very important when you're engaging the candidates, is it's not just about this one step before the election. It's not just about them making sure that you talk to them at these specific touch points, that you have a private hustings with them, talking to them, you have a public hustings where everyone can join. That's not enough. What you want is for them to say, this is what we will do for the Muslim community. And so what we did in this area is we created 58 questions, 5 pages worth of questions, saying, these are the concerns of the Muslim community here. And we got this through talking to everybody. 5 pages worth of questions. And we got the candidates, each one of them, to respond and give up to 30 pages worth of answers saying, these are our pledges to the Muslim community. And they're available online for anyone who's interested. And you can see in Harrow East and Harrow West, all the main candidates, bar a couple, have filled this out. And this is 30 pages worth of answers to say, this is our pledge to the Muslim community. This is powerful. The only reason they're going to fill in and write out 30 pages worth of responses is if they think you're a force to be reckoned with. And that's what we've been able to do here, because it's the reality. And it's the duty of an MP to answer the questions that are of concern to the residents and their constituents. And so this again helps create that engagement. And finally, it's not about only pre-election, it's also about post-election. It's not just before when you engage with them, it's after. And when you engage with the politicians, they understand who you are. You're able to influence them in many different issues going forward. And we've, as I said, so this is an example. This is our Muslim Forum of Middlesex page. So you go to muslimforums.co.uk/Middlesex, and you'll come to this page, and you will see one of the hustings, the video of one of the hustings there. And you will also see the questionnaire that we put together, which has 58 questions, as I said. And all the main candidates seem to have answered that. Now, that's all about engaging with the candidates. The next step is educating the community. Because when you are doing all of this, people still need to vote. And when people are voting, they need to be informed when they're making the decision. And so there are two parts of education. What do you educate the community with, and how do you do it? So when it comes to what you do, well, you need to explain what the political process is. Many people don't understand. You have general elections, you have local elections, you have different types of council elections and mayoral elections and European elections. And most people don't understand all of the details of this. But they would understand normally a national election. But it's worth understanding what that process is and the idea of what first past the post is. The secondary element, which actually is really important, is why vote. There is a growing group of people who, for different reasons, not just due to apathy, not just because they don't care, but they seem to have either a religious or a moral reason they don't want to vote or partake in the political process. It's a very dangerous situation when some of these people are spokespeople or they've got a large following, but this is what's happening right now. And we need to make sure it's very clear that people understand that without voting, you're not going to be able to engage with the political process. It's very difficult to say, I haven't voted for someone, I haven't taken part in the political process, but I'm disappointed with what my politician's doing. Well, if you're not participating in any way, then there is a problem here. I'm not saying that you don't have a right to. Everyone has a right to, as a British citizen, to raise their concerns. But by partaking in the political process, by voting, you are at least at the minimum creating some sort of engagement and saying that this is my voice and making your voice count. And then what do candidates believe on the issues we care about? So we've got this 30-page response from each of the candidates, and that's very useful for those who want to understand the details. But the reality is many people don't want a 30-page answer saying, this is what the Labour candidate thinks about on the issues that matter to me. What they want is a summary. They want the key points coming out. And so that's exactly what we've done in the Muslim Forum of Middlesex. We've created summary sheets and summary leaflets that have gone round in Stanmore, in Harrow Mosque, in the Sri Lankan Muslim Cultural Community Centre, and have gone out saying these are the issues and we've got one in the audience just there. Okay, one of the leaflets just there. So it's a summarized version of what the candidates believe, and that's what we need to do, and that's what we've done. And the question is, how do you do it? So you've got the issues, you've simplified them, you've got key language, and also language is an issue. There are many people who actually can't speak English very well, and making sure that you can have that translated into Afghani, Arabic, and Bengali and Urdu will help some parts of the community quite a lot. But the other thing to bear in mind whilst you're doing all of this is the law. So there is a charity lobbying law which says that any charity, including mosques, most of the mosques who are charities, cannot be seen to be partisan. In other words, supporting one political party over another. And so whenever you do anything, especially when you've got a group of different mosques together, you have to ensure that you're doing it in a non-partisan way. So the ways that you can do that are through the mosque, mailing list, the madrasa, at Friday prayers at Jummah, different seminars that are held. Then obviously it's social media and website. And finally, and probably most importantly, it's about the one-to-one talking to people. It's about canvassing. Because very often some people don't realize why there's a problem. And they want to vote one way. I think someone yesterday told me that they want to not vote for the Labour Party because they believe that the head of the Labour Party is actually Jewish. And therefore is likely to be supporting the Israeli policies on the issues. When actually the opposite happens to be the case, because the head of the Labour, because what we've seen in the Jewish Chronicle, for example, today, is saying that the vast majority of Jews are supporting the Conservative Party for the first time in a long time, because they don't believe that the leader of the Labour Party represents their views when it comes to Israel, according to the Jewish Chronicle vote. So it's very interesting that what you notice is that when you talk to people, things change. So education of the community is very important. And so this is the website that we have put together, and it has all of the different views of the different candidates and their pledges to the Muslim community. And as you can see, you've got the links of what the MP in, for example, Harrow East has said in the House of Commons. So if you just want to click through, you can see what that person has said, and more details available on the website. And the final thing I'd like to say is that once you have united, once you've understood and created your fact base, once you have engaged the candidates, and once you've educated your community, you have to actually turn out and vote. You have to participate in the political process. You have to canvass for the Muslim community. You have to do something to make a difference, whether it's joining political parties so you yourself can be a councillor or an MP or something more in the future. And unless you participate in the political process, it's very difficult to make a difference. And with that, I'd like to end and ask anyone if anyone has any questions. Salawat.
Thank you very much for that very interesting talk, Miqdaad. So we'll start with questions on the women's side. Does anyone have any questions on the women's side? Yeah.
Rather than a question, it's just an observation. Your Hustings site's got Bob Blackman and Omar Harrow East. What about Harrow West? The other problem I have at the moment is Gareth is very, very coming across as kind of not in the limelight. His literature that came out was appallingly poor. You see placards of Hannah David. Is there any reason why that is the case? And also, I got a comment from somebody that works in the Labour office that normally election time, the office is buzzing with ethnic minorities willing to come in and do, and it isn't the case this time round. Have you got any comments?
Yeah. So I think that there are two things that are interesting. Firstly, when it comes to the Muslim Forum Middlesex, we have a hustings for Harrow West next week, in just 1 week's time. And on the website, on the front page, we have Harrow East button and Harrow West button. You can click either one, and you can go and find out equal amounts of information from either candidate. Gareth Thomas, like the other candidates, has filled out 20-odd pages worth of responses, so you can ask and you can see and read and understand what his views are in detail, as well as question him next week. So the Muslim Forum Middlesex has been very fair on both areas, both Harrow East and Harrow West. When it comes to Gareth Thomas in particular, in Harrow West, my understanding of the situation is that Harrow West is rightly or wrongly seen to be safer than Harrow East. I think that there is a risk here, but what's happened is that on a national basis, there is an expectation that there's a swing to the Labour Party on a national basis. I'm not saying that locally. On a national basis, there's a swing to the Labour Party. So given that he's already got a 7% majority, the thinking, I'm not necessarily justifying it, I'm just explaining what I think might be the reason, is that 7% majority, all other things being equal, would increase. And so anything that Hannah David tries to do would be decreasing that majority, and there's quite a lot to do to combat that. So that might be one reason why there has perhaps been some complacency, one might argue, from the national campaign, maybe, when it comes to Harrow West. And what you do see is in Harrow East, which is seen as a marginal that might actually swing to the Labour Party, according to the Ashcroft poll, which was done most recently this month, which suggested that for the first time in Harrow East, Umar Kumaran, who's the Labour candidate, happens to be ahead of Bob Blackman in that one specific poll. Now, we have to be careful about reading too much into one poll, and in addition, we should be not complacent if one's supporting Labour Party or not in any way reliant on one poll, because that's not necessarily indicative of anything else. And it may not be a good thing for many people who support the Conservative Party. But what I'm saying is that because that is seen as a very swing constituency, what you do see is a significant number of people in Harrow East going out. And in fact, there are a lot of people in the Harrow East office, and that is seen to be much more buzzing in that way. Whereas the Harrow West one is not, perhaps because many people who were going to Harrow West are actually are told, go to Harrow East because it's something where you can make a bigger difference. So you do see that element as well. Now that's just my insight into the Labour Party, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, many people may support the Conservative Party, many people may support the Labour Party, but being completely politically neutral in this is important from mosques and charities.
Thank you.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, but there is a real problem here because, for instance, if you go even up to the Midlands, a lot of people haven't heard of the Muslim Council of Britain. You know, go further north than that, no, you know, very little people. So, first of all, what are they doing about increasing their visibility? And secondly, these 40 seats you've said where Muslims can make an impact, did you know about a politician called Muhammad Sarwar?
Yes.
Yeah? In Glasgow. Do you know how he got in?
Yes.
Yeah? So why are they not doing the Muhammad Sarwar experiment in these 40 seats and getting Muslim candidates to go in front?
Okay, so two important questions, perhaps phrased in an interesting way. So when it comes to the Muslim Council of Britain, I think the reality with general Muslim bodies is, unfortunately, many people don't see the value of donating on a local level. So in general, when it comes to the Muslim community, the vast majority, even as one of the largest charity givers compared to any other faith group, even in spite of that, and there being 3 million Muslims in the UK, the reality is that they don't seem to want to contribute to the UK in general, in UK-related Muslims. Okay, Muslim groups don't have that kind of support. So whilst there are other groups who have national organizations who are very well funded, the Muslim Council of Britain is not. And its annual budget is less than many small mosques. Very small mosques, actually. And it works on and very small charities. It's smaller than very many small charities. And so without any sort of professionalization, because it's a volunteer-based organization, there has to be a prioritization which is done on the Muslim communities, on the MCB's work. Is the first thing that needs to be done actually trying to work with the government to change things that will impact the entirety of the country? Is that a priority, and to create the fact base which can then drive decision-making in the future? Or is the priority trying to get known more? So I guess it's a difficult question because, I mean, it's around, obviously by getting known more, you might be able to get more and be able, I agree, but it's a very difficult thing to do when you have two members of staff who are trying to support a media campaign on a daily basis where, people are asking the Muslim Council of Britain, what is the Muslim community's view on issues? It's very difficult to just deal with that on a reactive basis and create this fact base which is important and engage with the government, which are, to be honest, the primary concerns of a national body and have to be. And then also engage as much as possible with the wider community. And so one of the problems also with it is the structure of the Muslim Council of Britain. It works in a way where mosques and the leadership participate in the AGM, and those are the people who vote and choose the Secretary General, etc. So because it's the leaders of the mosques, it's not the mosques themselves, it's not the participants in the mosque. Many of the participants may not know about the MCB, but their leadership does. And the leadership realize the value of it as well, because they get all the emails, they get the constant information, etc. coming in. But the wider population doesn't necessarily. So this is something that there needs to be a way around it, and that realistically it's all about money. Once money comes in and fundraising can make a difference, then doors can be opened because time can be put into making that difference. So that's when it comes to the MCB. The second question, which was about how making sure that Muslims participate in the political process by becoming MPs, that's kind of people are trying to do that. Now, one thing to bear in mind when all of this is happening is that whenever any Muslim tries to do things like this, nowadays, they get accused of something called entryism. It's a new term that has been coined just to attack Muslims. Okay, there's a journalist in the Telegraph who seems to love this, and he seems to talk about Muslims in this way all the time. That whenever Muslims get together, you know what? They're trying to impose their views on others. They're not. They're just participating in the political process like anyone else. But this is the sort of attack that is now becoming a mainstream word, this entryism, that Muslims are entering into government, entering into the political process, and they are poisoning it and changing it to their own concerns. It is nonsense. It's complete. I mean, the entire, and they talk about it when it comes to the Trojan horse situation in Birmingham, even though it's proven to be, at least in many parts, not true. So the reality is in everyone, education, in politics, in police, in everything, they're saying that Muslims are entering so they can change it, not because they want to participate in it. And this is what this entryism is called. So there are barriers that are created. Another barrier, actually, which is quite important and maybe we don't necessarily appreciate so much, is when it comes to women. Okay, so right now there is a very strong push, rightly so, by all of the parties to increase the number of women in parliament, so it is more representative of our society, and therefore there are all women shortlists, etc. What this has done actually is made ethnic minorities not as high a priority as having more women in parliament. Now, of course, more women in parliament is very important, but what we see actually is there is a risk that for the first time this year, it may be the case, and it's not necessarily the case, but may be the case that the Labour Party have fewer minority ethnic MPs than the Conservative Party. It's a possibility. Now, this is appalling were this to happen. I mean, the Labour Party prides itself, rightly so, and many of its policies work in this way, of supporting the minority ethnic communities. But what you have seen is partially because of the all-women shortlists and the fact that when it comes to the Muslim community, we don't have as many active women participating as there should be. I mean, the Muslim community is not as diverse as it should be when it comes to gender in areas in leadership, when it comes to mosque or any other area. And so this means that we're a step behind, and this is another barrier. And so I would say that yes, more is being done to try and do this more, but it's a long way to go until, and because of these barriers, there's a long way to go until you reach a level where you get 30 odd MPs, which is truly representative of the Muslim community. I would also add one final point, which is it's a lot to do with the first past the post system, which makes it more difficult as well. Because if you've got a more proportionally representative voting system, you may have more likelihood of a more representative group. Does that make sense?
Any more questions from the ladies' side? Men's side.
Thank you, Miqdaad. I have a few questions, but I will ask only one at the moment. I'll give others the opportunity. We have 3 million Muslims here, you said. What percentage of 3 million are the voting age? And how many people nearly go to vote? How many Muslim percentage go to vote?
When it comes to voting age, I know that I do have something somewhere. We have... I don't know the answer to that question. As a whole, we are a younger population when it comes compared to everyone else. Our 0 to 15 form about 8% of the total population. So if you work backwards, about 500,000, so add 700. I'd say at least 2.1 million Muslims are probably of voting age. That's a guess. Yeah, it's a guess, but about 2 million Muslims.
Which is about 2/3 of the population.
Yeah. It's a guess. I think there's more information in the British Muslims in Numbers report, which has come from Muslim Council of Britain. But I think it's around 2 million. When it comes to registration and actually voting, we're quite appalling. In Harrow East, I believe that there are about 9,000 Muslims of voting age. And according to Bob Blackman, and I think this number is probably unlikely, only 1,000 turned up last time. Now, I don't know how far that's true. That seems to be low. I think it's closer to probably 3,000 or 30-odd%. The general number of people who vote is about 57%, I think 58% in the population, give or take. And the Muslim population, at least in Harrow, I think is more like 30% who end up voting. And obviously that makes a big difference.
Yeah, you've made a summary and they've put on their website their views, all the candidates. I mean, it's fine, when you look at what they're saying, obviously they're going to say things which are the right things which we want to hear. So it's difficult to actually make to actually understand what the actual views are and how they feel. For example, I know you haven't said this, but Hannah David, we've tried to engage with her, tried to communicate with her, but she's completely ignored Muslims. She didn't even want to meet us. Now that doesn't, when you look at it, she's talking about Muslim, she cares about Muslims and all that, but yet she didn't engage with us. Now that, so that kind of is very misleading. Secondly, things like she's a very pro-Zionist. I mean, I was following her Twitter feed during the Gaza war, and she's extremely pro-Zionist. Now, those kind of things don't come up, so it can be misleading. So we have to be careful and do a lot more research as to what the candidates are all about. Yeah.
Yes.
So again, and just another point I'd like to make about Harrow West and Harrow East, about Gareth. Yeah, it's true. Gareth is he's the MP there at the moment, and it seemed that he's got quite a big lead, and he was never worried. And on the other side, with East Harrow, we've got Bob Blackman. A lot of people, he has got a reasonable vote advantage of 3,000, but because of what the sort of things that he's come up with, we've seen him in the hustings. A lot of Muslims don't like what he's been saying, so that's why there's been a lot of work that Muslims have been campaigning on East Harrow, and that's probably why West Harrow has been left out. Now, one thing we've got to be careful of is Hannah David has spent a lot of money. She's a very rich lady, and she's been putting a lot of money in a campaign, and that's why we're seeing a very active campaign from her. And I know, because I was at Garrett's office today, and it's like you're saying, there was nobody there. And they are a bit worried now because of, the way things are going. So just to make people aware that, we really need to, it's Harrow we're talking about, that's where we can make a difference. So we really need to, be active and make sure that we would look at it and go out and vote.
Yeah. I think that there's a very interesting point that was raised, I think, when it comes to how the charity lobbying law works and the impact on the community. So as a mosque or as a charity or as the Muslim Forum of Middlesex, an umbrella of different charities, how do you make it clear when one candidate has quite explicitly been not done what the other candidates have done? How do you make it clear that one person is not as good as the other person when it comes to engagement with us? And it's a very difficult line to draw, because you can't, it's very difficult to say this person hasn't supported us and you put a big leaflet out saying that. Even though that is a fact of what's happened. Yeah. So you've got to be very careful, because it may be seen to be supportive of one candidate or not. You're putting money into something. For example, if you put leaflets out, you're putting money, which is charity money, into a campaign that is supporting one candidate. Now, there are certain laws when it comes to charities doing this with charitable donations, and therefore you have to be very careful. If, however, what you are doing is furthering the charity's specific objectives in a non-partisan fashion, then it can be argued that that's the case. And so from our perspective, we will make sure that that there is proper transparency, and the fact that, for example, at next week's hustings, Hannah David is not going to be there, and there will be an empty chair because she will not be there. And we will explain what has gone about in the last 6 months, actually, to try and ensure that there was someone who comes in, and there isn't anyone who's going to be there on that day. And we will explain that, and that will be on a video, and that will be available for everybody. And that is the fact of the matter, and we'll have everybody to be able to ask the questions that they want to the other candidates who will be there. So as much as possible, we will make sure that we are transparent in that process. But we will also make sure that when we create those leaflet summaries, they also reflect the reality of what happened in this case. And as much as possible, in a non-partisan way, we are fair and transparent to the different candidates.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Otherwise, no. Thank you very much, Miqdaad. Salwat.